Hi, this is Brett Ingram, award-winning entrepreneur, and today I want to help answer the question, is your entrepreneurial ego helping you or hurting you? The ego, right? If we're going to accomplish anything great in any aspect of our lives, there has to be part of us that dreams big. There has to be part of us that believes that we're capable of great things, because it all starts with that. If we don't believe we can do it, if we don't have that dream in the first place, we're never going to be able to set out to do anything. Nobody sets out to just try something and then, oops, all of a sudden they become great by accident, right? It doesn't really happen that way. You might try to accomplish something and become great at something other than what you originally set out to do, and that's totally fine. But nobody sits on the couch and then all of a sudden greatness is thrust upon them. They've got some dream, they've got some idea, they take action to get it going, and then as a result of that, whether or not the path is straight and narrow or it's meandering and they end up somewhere else, the fact of the matter is that's what the sort of root and source of greatness is, right? So it's essential to being an entrepreneur. If we're going to have an entrepreneur, whether we want to own, an ice cream shop or a hair salon, or we want to own a digital marketing empire, or we want to start a new car company or space exploration, whatever it is, it doesn't matter how big or how small. The fact is we have to have some kind of ego that says that we could do it. When we get a job, we just have to have enough ego that says, hey, we could do this job. And usually we can get that just from the fact that we have experience, we have skills, and if they hired us for it, they're telling us that they think that we can do it. But when we're an entrepreneur, we have to do that ourselves. We have to be the ones that believe in ourselves and are the ones that are willing to put our money where our mouth is, because we have to be able to put our own time, energy, effort, and resources into making it work. So the question is it always a good thing? Is it always a good thing to sort of have an ego and sort of have that belief that we can do everything? Or is there a point at which our ego can actually hurt us instead of empowering us and helping us to get to where we want to go? Well, it's an interesting question, and it's actually a complicated answer. When I look at my own entrepreneurial journey, my whole thing started in terms of my current business and my current situation. Basically, back in 2007, I was in graduate school, and I've told this story. I was working full time. I already had wife and kids at home, and I had the mortgage and car payments and all that other kind of stuff. I was working full-time job, and I was going to graduate school at night. And the idea was I was going to go to graduate school, and I was going to come out with an MBA and go into consulting. And that is ultimately what I thought I was going to want to do. And the reason is it felt like a good match for me in a lot of ways. And I also felt like it would provide financial security for my family, because it was something that I would enjoy doing more, but it also pays pretty well. And so that's essentially what the goal was. And as I got closer to getting out, I was a few months before graduation, I'd started to send out resumes, and I had started to look for actual jobs in that new career, because I was in staffing at the time. And so I was basically doing that, and it was fun enough, but it wasn't anything I was passionate about. It wasn't anything that was going to help me reach my goals in life. And so it isn't something that I was going to stick with. And so the fact is that's the path I was on. I had invested years of my life in graduate school and tens of thousands of dollars to go to graduate school to do this, with the idea I was going to, and then a few months before I was going to get out and go on to my new career path, that's when I decided to start a business. I just felt as though if I was a consultant, I already had a family. I wasn't that young anymore. And so the fact is, I was worried that I was going to be flying all over the country, flying all over the world, and living out of hotels and calling home instead of being able to be there with my family and enjoying the lifestyle that I was helping create. And so I decided at that moment that I was actually going to start a business. And so, the question is, was that a good decision or was it a bad decision? I mean, on the one hand, some people would say, look, you're absolutely nuts. You invested all this money already in graduate school. You're on this path. You've got this thing sort of lined up. I mean, I didn't have a job offer, but I was interviewing and stuff. And why would you deviate? That's the safe path. And so to throw that away or to turn my back on that and to start my own business involved a lot of risk. I didn't take out massive loans or, need huge capital investments or anything like that to do what I was doing, but it still was a different path. And every time we make a decision not to do all the things that we're deciding, to do. And so the fact is, it was risky. And I'll say that in the beginning, it looked really good. It looked smart because I was able to sort of keep my job and work this part-time and work it till I got to a point where I could quit and I could make a full-time living. And so it looked really smart. I was at home, I was working from home, and I was doing that, and everything looked good, and I was feeling pretty good and ready to pat myself on the back. I hadn't reached the mountaintop, but I was at least in a stable situation where I was making enough, and I felt like the sky was the limit, and I was just going to grow from there. So ego drove me to do it, I guess, and that's where I was. And so everything was good. Well, we fast forward, and a couple of years later, I had sort of climbed and climbed and climbed, and then I had this really big product launch, and we did $100,000 in sales in a single day, and I was feeling on top of the world. I was feeling like I had arrived. This was my coronation, and now the rest of my life was going to be nothing but palm trees, margaritas, and happiness all the rest of the way. And the fact is, 6 months later, the entire market that I was in bottomed out. The entire thing just imploded. The long story short of it is there were some external factors with some scammers in the industry, things like that, and it caused the banks to shut everything down financially in the market. And so basically, I went from the top to the bottom in a 6-month period of time, and it got very difficult to sell anything. All of the stuff that I had been doing, all the stuff that I had built was no longer working. And all the partners that I had relied on and that we worked together with all pulled back and went internal with all the stuff that they were doing. And most of them were far more established than I was. So they were able to sustain that and ride it out. I was not. So I had to figure out what I was going to do to survive. Like I was at that level of literally trying to figure out how to survive doing this. And so at that point, it didn't look so good. It looked like it was a bad decision and it was dumb. And what I really should have done was just take a consulting job, because had I done that, I would have been a few years into it. I would have been established in my career and everything would have been good. I would have had a stable income and all that. Now, obviously, we never know what would have happened, right? That's what we always think. We always think the grass is greener. The fact is, maybe I would have gone into consulting and got laid off 3 months later and couldn't find another job. We have no idea. And so, but those are the tricks that our mind plays on us when we're in these situations. When things are good, we're always really happy that we did what we did. When things go bad, we look around and we say, geez, I should have just been the smart guy. I should have just been stable. I'm highly employable. I can do a lot of things. I should have just done that like all my friends did. They're sitting at home, comfortable doing what they're doing, and I'm out here struggling and panicked because my business is imploding. And so it went from one swing to the other. Well, if we fast forward again, I rode that out. And so over the next couple of years, it was a little bit slow, but I was able to gradually start to build things back. The market started to come back. And I partnered with a guy. We started to work together, and everything started to get back on track. So it was going really good. And I, again, sort of got all the way back up where I was doing really successful launches again. Everything was going really great, and I was feeling really good about it. And then I got the idea, because everything was going so well, that I really wanted to make a game changer of a software app. I wanted something that I was going to create that nobody else had, that was going to revolutionize what I was doing. And I saw an opportunity in the video space. And without getting into the details, maybe I'll cover that on some other episode or talk about it offline at some point. But basically the idea was I wanted to build the software that was going to be the best video software that was available. And at the time, that wasn't as tall an order as it is today. And so I pumped a ton of money into a specific type of software. By ton of money, I mean over $200,000. So not all at once, but over the course of time, pumped a couple $100,000 into the software. Now, it worked to some extent. I mean, I was able to launch it a few times and generate over $1 million in sales on it. So it's not like it was a dumb decision in that regard. But I fast forward to where we are like recently, and just in the last couple of years, the explosion of AI and video production stuff has made it that it's very difficult to compete because there are major companies now that are on board doing this. And also there's a huge push toward web-based. So even though the web-based video can't handle what the desktop video can do, it's a much, much more difficult and mature market. And so this piece of software that all this was invested in, while I was able to launch it and, make my money back, so to speak, that money could have been put to a lot of other good uses where I could have changed the world in a lot of ways. And ultimately, I'm not going to be able to build that product that I wanted to because it took too long to get to where I was going. And other guys are sort of ahead of me on the curve with much larger budgets, much larger teams. And so I ultimately needed to go in another direction. And so maybe the decision to go and make my ego put, so much resources toward this one thing, maybe that wasn't a great idea. Maybe the smart thing was to go another way. So overall, it was good. But the fact of the matter is, I could have used that in a lot of other ways far more effectively and leveraged it to far greater results than sort of, $1 million in sales. And so the fact of the matter is, if I look at my life today and I reflect back to that decision in graduate school, I would say overall, obviously, I feel very happy about my decision. But that isn't to say that along the way, I didn't have many moments where I really questioned it. And I had many moments where I had wished that I had just gotten the job, stuck with the job, and done that. We never know what would have happened if I did, and maybe I would have said I should have started that business back then. I'm sure I would have had days like that. But the fact is, the importance of that is to understand that you can see how our ego can play tricks on us. It can help us. It can help us to take big risks, but it can also put us in bad positions where when we start to do it, despite the fact of what's happening, we may ultimately double down on things that aren't going well, or we might lean in because we don't want to admit that things aren't the right way or that we shouldn't have done that. So the question becomes, did I let ego force me into bad decisions? And at times it did. At times I threw bad money after good or good money after bad because I was invested in it. And I believed I was going to do this great thing. And so even though I had sort of that voice in my head and that little guy on my shoulder saying, you know what, you should probably just pull the plug and go elsewhere with this, a couple of times over my career, I didn't. I pushed further and I tried to make it work anyway, only to find that I ended up pulling the plug on it regardless. But at the same time, it also led me here. So I can't totally regret it. There's been good and bad. If we look at other examples outside my own personal experience, one big corporate example of this is IBM. IBM at the time, back in the 1970s and 80s, was the biggest tech player in the world, right? In 1982, they had an 80% share of the personal computer market. Think about that, 80% share. I don't know what it is now, but there isn't a single company with a large share at all. There are so many companies with their own little slice. I mean, I think if you had 25% share of the market, that's probably awesome right now, right? They had an 80% share, and people warned them that they were getting too complacent. Their prices were too high. They were too resistant to change. They didn't want to move anything or change anything. In fact, even the dress code at IBM was either a black or a navy suit and a blue tie or a red tie. Those were the only outfits even allowed at IBM. So every person wore exactly the same thing. And it's funny by today's standards, but the fact is they put their head in the sand. They said, oh, we're too big to fail. Nothing's ever going to happen to us. Within 10 years, their share dropped to 20% of the market. They lost 60% in a 10-year period of time, and the company literally almost folded. In fact, It's such a famous case study that business schools study this now because it's a case in what not to do. But to their credit, they also were able to rebound and build themselves back into a service-based company where they actually have been able to survive and ride that out. If we look at personal examples from our more current time, look at somebody just like Elon Musk. Regardless of how you feel about him personally, like him, hate him, whatever, it doesn't really matter. If we look at him just through the entrepreneurial lens, right, he built Tesla, which was a revolutionary car company. And again, you may like Tesla, you may dislike them, but the fact is what he did at the time was somewhat revolutionary. SpaceX. I mean, he's actually an individual person had an idea that they're going to launch rockets into space. Who does that? But at the same time, he had the disaster that's the Twitter takeover, where he renamed it X. It's become a breeding ground for like hatred and negativity and all this other stuff. It's plummeted in terms of its value, and it's been a total disaster. But you can see his ego was there to propel him to dream about things like Tesla and SpaceX, but also to be stubborn enough that when things were going down the toilet at Twitter and X, he just doubles down on that and refuses to compromise or make changes. And so that is the blessing and the curse when we're an entrepreneur, right? So our ego has a lot of positive traits to it as entrepreneurs. First of all, it can get us to set goals and even attempt things that most people wouldn't even dare of. We wouldn't even get to that point if we didn't have an ego, if we didn't have something pushing us, telling us, whispering in our ear, you could be great, you could do great things. So we need that. It can also make us very persuasive. It can make us persuasive enough to convince other people to join our journey, right? Any great journey, any great accomplishment can't be done solely on our own. And we need other people on board in order to do it. But we need to be persuasive. Steve Jobs had insane ideas about stuff that he was doing. But he was so persuasive. He was so convinced and sure of himself that other people were just like, it was like the Pied Piper. They just followed along like, yep, we're going to do this. And ultimately they did some stuff that ultimately changed the world that we live in today. And so it can make us very persuasive and allow us to, give us the power to convince other people, which then sort of rises the collective belief of everybody. And so it can get other people to believe that we can do it and get them to buy in so they believe they can do it. It can also give us the belief and the swagger to take action and to keep going against all odds, right? So even if we have the ego to start, even if we have the ego initially because we haven't done anything yet and haven't experienced any trouble, to convince other people, once we start going, there are going to be some bumps in the road. And there are going to be some things, some roadblocks that we hit. And our ego can keep pushing us on, whipping us in the back, saying, keep going against all odds and against, all those kinds of things. It can help us ignore noise, obstacles, and negativity, right? Some people are going to be telling us, you'll never do that, you can't do that. We hear this famous analogy in sports all the time. The person that was told as a youth, you're too small, you're too weak, you're too slow, right? And then they go on to accomplish great things. If they listen to that, if they didn't have enough of an ego to say, I'm going to do this anyway, we never would have known who they were. And they never would have had a success story. So it can help us do all of that. On the negative side, ego has some issues too, because it can send us on fool's errands that waste time, energy, and resources. If I could have taken that $200,000 back that I spent on the video software and used it for other things, sure, I made $1 million in sales or, 1.2 or 4 or whatever. But the fact is, I could have turned that into 10 times that. I could have leveraged that far better. And so it can send us on fool's errands that waste time, energy, and resources. It can also make us ignore warning signs and underestimate problems. We're driving toward that and we see that there's an issue, but we ignore it, right? That's different than still having the belief that we can overcome it. When we ignore it, that's bad. If we just believe we can overcome it and there's some truth to it, then so be it. But if it's an obstacle like an economic shift where it isn't going to happen, then sometimes that can be a real problem. We can underestimate what those issues are. It can also make us too stubborn to cut our losses. We start pouring money into something, we start pouring time into something, and we're so convinced and we're so committed to doing it. We have a psychological principle called cognitive dissonance. It's very hard for us when we've established our belief in something to change that. It's why when you argue with people about politics and religion, you're not going to change their mind. Because once they've convinced themselves of something, it's very difficult to accept anything that doesn't fit within that filter. And so the idea is, it can make us stubborn, and we don't want to cut our losses, so we just keep doubling down and keep anteing up until we get to a point where it's dire and we can't do it anymore. It can also make us make bad decisions to save face or preserve our pride. We don't want to admit that it was wrong. So, we're just going to burn this pile of money because we have to keep up the appearance that we were right all along. So the ego is a complicated thing in business and entrepreneurship. There are times and instances when it propels us forward, but sometimes it may propel us forward right over the cliff. It's okay to take huge risks if we can sustain and absorb the failure. But if not, we may want to think twice about it and just be sure. So the takeaway here is that it's super important for every entrepreneur to be self-aware, to understand our strengths and weaknesses, our merits and our flaws, and be willing to acknowledge them so we can maximize our potential and we can minimize our risk. When it comes to ego, it's hard for entrepreneurs to admit defeat or recognize mistakes because it's part of us. It's our dream, and it's our vision, and it's our decisions that lead to success and failure. It can be hard to separate ourselves from our businesses, but that's exactly what we need to do. If we commit to being honest with ourselves, or we have someone in our circle that we trust that will be honest with us, we can minimize our odds of compounding bad decisions and mistakes, and we can maximize our potential for success.